The morning sun peeked through the blinds of the Sunrise Diner as Maggie wiped down the counters, humming softly to herself. She'd been working the morning shift for nearly 3 years now. The place wasn't fancy by any means. The vinyl seats had cracks showing their age, the wallpaper was peeling slightly in the corners, and the jukebox in the corner only played songs from 20 years ago. But to the folks in this small town, it was home. Every morning at exactly 7:15, Maggie would glance up from her coffee pot to see the same little boy walk past the large front window. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with a mop of untidy brown hair that needed a good trim. His coat was always the same, much too big for his small frame, with sleeves that hung past his fingertips. The backpack he carried looked like it might fall apart any day now, the straps held together with what looked like duct tape. Poor little fella, Maggie would think to herself, noticing how his cheeks seemed a bit too hollow, his steps a bit too slow as he trudged past. His eyes always stayed fixed on the ground, never looking up to meet anyone's gaze. One particularly cold morning, when rain poured down in sheets outside the diner windows, Maggie watched the boy struggle against the wind. Without thinking twice, she grabbed a warm breakfast sandwich she'd just prepared, wrapped it quickly in foil, and dashed out the front door. "Hey there," she called out, her hair getting instantly soaked. The boy froze, looking startled and ready to run. "You look like you could use something warm." The boy stared at the wrapped sandwich, his eyes wide with surprise and suspicion. His hands trembled slightly, from cold or nervousness, Maggie couldn't tell. "It's okay," she said gently, holding it out. "I made too many this morning. Just gonna throw it out otherwise." It wasn't true, of course, but something told her the boy wouldn't take charity. After what felt like forever, his small hand reached out and took the sandwich. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything at all. But the quick, hungry way he tucked it into his pocket told Maggie everything she needed to know. The next morning, Maggie prepared an extra breakfast sandwich before the morning rush. She placed it on the corner table by the window, where she could see the sidewalk. When the boy walked by at his usual time, she tapped on the glass and waved him in. He hesitated for a long moment before pushing open the heavy door. The little bell jingled above him, making him jump slightly. Without a word, he slipped into the seat, grabbed the sandwich, and darted back out. This became their silent routine. Every morning, Maggie would have something waiting. Sometimes a sandwich, sometimes pancakes in a takeout container, often with fruit or a carton of milk. The boy never spoke, never smiled, just quietly took the food and left. But Maggie started noticing small changes. By the third week, his face looked a little less hollow. After a month, he started staying long enough to eat at the corner table, though his eyes remained watchful, like a wild animal ready to flee at the slightest noise. 2 months in, Maggie spotted the ghost of a smile as she placed a chocolate chip pancake in front of him, gone so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it. But the most rewarding change came in how he carried himself. His shoulders, once permanently hunched forward as if expecting a blow, gradually began to straighten. His steps became a little livelier, his gaze occasionally lifting from the ground to take in his surroundings. He was still painfully thin, still quiet as a shadow, but there was something different about him now. A tiny spark of hope that hadn't been there before. It took almost a month before the owner of the diner noticed what was happening. Lou was a big man with thick forearms and a permanent frown etched into his weathered face. He'd been running the Sunrise for nearly 30 years, and most folks in town thought he was as hard as the ancient grill he cooked on. One morning, Lou caught Maggie wrapping up a cinnamon roll and some bacon in wax paper. "Been meaning to ask," he said, his voice like gravel. "What's with the takeout order that never gets rung up?" Maggie felt her cheeks grow warm. She'd been careful to make the food when Lou was busy in the back, but of course he'd notice eventually. The diner survived on razor-thin margins. "I'll pay for it myself," she said quickly, reaching for her purse under the counter. "It's just, there's this boy who walks by, and he looks like he could use a good meal." Lou watched her for a long moment, his bushy eyebrows drawn together. Maggie braced herself for a lecture about business sense and charity cases, but then something unexpected happened. The permanent frown softened just a touch. "Put that away," he said, nodding at her wallet. "My grandmother would roll over in her grave if I charged for feeding a hungry kid." He turned back toward the kitchen, then paused. "Next time, give him some eggs too." growing boy needs protein. Maggie smiled to herself as Lou disappeared into the back. For all his gruffness, the old man had a heart after all. Over the following weeks, Maggie learned little pieces about the boy, like putting together a puzzle without knowing what the final picture should be. She noticed the name Tommy written on the corner of a worksheet that peeked out from his backpack one morning. She observed how he always arrived from the east side of town, where the houses grew smaller and more rundown. His shoes told their own story, worn almost through at the soles, with laces that had been knotted multiple times where they'd broken. One morning, as Tommy reached for his usual napkin, Maggie spotted dark purple marks circling his thin wrist. Her heart sank like a stone. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked softly, nodding toward his arm. Tommy yanked his sleeve down so fast he knocked over his juice. Without a word, he bolted from the diner, leaving his half-eaten breakfast behind. He didn't come back the next day or the day after. Maggie worried she'd scared him off for good. On the third day, just as she was losing hope, the bell above the door jingled, and there he was, standing cautiously by the entrance, eyes darting around as if expecting trouble. "Got your usual waiting," Maggie said cheerfully, pretending nothing had happened. Relief flooded through her when he slipped into his seat. Word spread among the small diner staff. Flo, the older waitress who worked weekends, started leaving little packs of cookies by Tommy's plate. Carlos, the fry cook, made sure the boys' eggs were always perfectly cooked, the bacon extra crispy. Even Lou would grunt a gruff morning whenever the boy came in, which was practically a speech coming from him. Sometimes Maggie would fold a small note into Tommy's napkin, nothing pushy, just things like, "Hope you have a good day," or "You've got this." She couldn't tell if he read them, but she kept writing them anyway. One day, Carlos nudged Maggie and nodded toward Tommy's usual table. For the first time since he'd started coming to the diner, the boy was actually drawing something in a tattered notebook. Maggie caught a glimpse as she refilled his water glass. It was a simple pencil sketch of the diner, with stick figures behind the counter. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny opening in a wall built brick by brick. Winter came early that year, sweeping into town with bitter winds that rattled the diner's old windows. Maggie arrived at work in the dark hours of morning, her breath making clouds in the frigid air as she unlocked the front door. The forecast had predicted the coldest snap in 10 years. She thought about Tommy as she turned on the lights and fired up the grill. Would he have a warm enough coat, proper gloves? The questions nagged at her as she prepared for the morning rush. When 7:15 came and went with no sign of him, Maggie found herself checking the window every few minutes. By 8 o'clock, worry had settled like a weight in her stomach. It wasn't like him to miss a day, especially not without the rain or snow keeping him away. Just as she was about to give up, the bell above the door jingled. Tommy stood in the entrance, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. The jacket he wore was the same thin one he'd had all fall, now woefully inadequate against the biting cold. His lips had a bluish tint that frightened Maggie, but what really made her heart skip was the angry red mark blooming across his left cheek. "Good heavens, honey, come sit by the heater," she said, ushering him to the table closest to the old radiator. Lou appeared from the kitchen, took one look at the boy, and wordlessly disappeared back through the swinging doors. He returned moments later with a steaming mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. "Drink it slow," Lou said gruffly, setting it down. "Too hot for gulping." As Tommy wrapped his trembling hands around the mug, Maggie noticed his fingers were red and raw from the cold. No gloves, just as she'd feared. She glanced at Lou, who gave a small nod before heading back to the kitchen. That evening after her shift, Maggie drove through the neighborhoods east of town. It took nearly an hour of careful searching before she spotted Tommy trudging along a side street, head down against the wind. She followed at a distance, watching as he turned into the driveway of a shabby house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The yard was littered with empty bottles. Over the next few days, Maggie asked subtle questions around town. The mail carrier mentioned the house belonged to a man named Ray Wilson, who'd taken in his nephew after some trouble with the parents. The grocery store clerk rolled her eyes and muttered about how Ray spent more on booze than food. A regular at the diner who worked at the gas station said Ray had a temper that flared up when he drank, which was most nights. The pieces fit together into a picture that kept Maggie awake at night. She started leaving warmer things with Tommy's breakfast. A wool hat one day, thick socks another, finally a proper winter jacket she found on sale. When Lou caught her tucking a $20 bill into the pocket, he didn't say a word, just added a 20 of his own. For emergencies, Maggie told Tommy as she handed him the coat. It was the first time she'd seen real surprise on his face, followed by something that might have been the ghost of a smile. A week later, she carefully wrapped a small prepaid phone in a paper napkin and slid it onto his plate along with his pancakes. "My number's already in there," she said quietly. "If you ever need help, day or night, you just call. Doesn't matter what time." Tommy stared at the phone for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. He didn't say thank you. He never did. But he met her eyes directly for the first time since he'd started coming to the diner. 3 nights later, just after 2 a.m., Maggie's phone rang, startling her awake. The voice on the other end was so small, so frightened, she barely recognized it as Tommy's. "He's breaking everything," the boy whispered. "I'm hiding at the corner store." Maggie threw on clothes faster than she ever had in her life, grabbing her car keys and racing out the door. The streets were empty in the dead of night as she drove to the corner store near Tommy's house, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him huddled behind the ice machine, trembling in the cold, a small backpack clutched to his chest. "It's okay now," she whispered, wrapping her coat around his shoulders. "You're safe." The store clerk, a young man barely out of high school, handed them both steaming cups of coffee. "I was about to call the cops," he said quietly. "Kid came running in here like something was chasing him." Maggie hesitated, wondering what to do next. She couldn't take Tommy back to their house, but she wasn't family, had no legal right to take him anywhere else. The boy looked up at her with those solemn eyes, trusting her to figure it out. "I have a friend," she said finally, "someone who might know how to help." An hour later, they sat in the warm kitchen of Maggie's old high school friend, Jen, who had become a lawyer. Jen placed a mug of hot chocolate in front of Tommy and spoke to him in a gentle voice. "Would you be willing to tell me what happened tonight? Just the facts, in your own words." Tommy stared down at his mug for so long that Maggie thought he wouldn't speak. Then, in a voice so soft they had to lean in to hear, he began to talk. He told them about his uncle's drinking, the shouting, the nights spent hiding in the closet. He rolled up his sleeve to show fading bruises alongside fresh ones. He explained how his parents had died in a car crash last year, how there had been no one else to take him in. By the time he finished, Jen's face was grim. She stepped into the next room to make some phone calls, returning 20 minutes later with a determined look. "I've got a judge who owes me a favor," she said, "and a friend at the Family Services office who won't mind being woken up for this." Morning found them all bleary-eyed but resolute. Jen had arranged for an emergency hearing and temporary custody order. All they needed was documentation of Tommy's situation and official statements. "You'll need to tell your story one more time," Jen explained to Tommy, "to people who can make sure you never have to go back there." Tommy looked terrified but nodded. "Will Maggie come too?" "Every step of the way," Maggie promised, squeezing his hand. For the first time in months, Maggie didn't show up for her morning shift at the diner. Lou covered for her without question after a hurried phone call explaining the situation. The hearing was brief but thorough. Tommy spoke clearly this time, the judge listening with kind but serious attention. By noon, it was done. Tommy would be placed in emergency foster care while his uncle was investigated. Maggie hugged him tight before he left with the kind-faced social worker. "I'll visit as often as they let me," she promised. "And there will always be breakfast waiting for you at the diner." 3 days later, Maggie was wiping down counters at the end of her shift when she glanced up to see 4 black SUVs pull into the diner parking lot. Her stomach dropped. Government vehicles, all identical, all intimidating. Men and women in suits filed out, speaking in low voices. One of them, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, headed straight for the entrance. Maggie stood frozen behind the counter, wondering if she'd somehow broken the law by helping Tommy. Could they arrest her for interfering? For taking him from his home? The bell jingled as the woman entered, scanning the nearly empty diner before her eyes settled on Maggie. "Are you Margaret Wilson?" she asked in a crisp, professional voice. Maggie nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Everyone calls me Maggie." "My name is Dr. Catherine Chen," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm the executive director of the Chilled Well Foundation. We've been looking for Thomas Roberts for a very long time. Dr. Chen seated herself at the counter, politely declining coffee but accepting a glass of water. Liu hovered nearby, pretending to wipe down menus while clearly listening to every word. Thomas Roberts isn't just any child, Dr. Chen explained, her voice low. His parents were Dr. David and Dr. Linda Roberts, brilliant research scientists who developed a groundbreaking treatment for childhood leukemia. Maggie shook her head, confused. Tommy told me his parents died in a car crash last year. They did, Dr. Chen nodded grimly. But what he doesn't know is that the crash wasn't an accident. The police investigation found evidence of tampering with their vehicle. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she set down her rag. After their deaths, Thomas disappeared from the system, Dr. Chen continued. His uncle, Raymond Wilson, falsified documents claiming guardianship. We've been searching for Thomas for 11 months. Outside, more people in suits were gathering, some talking into phones, others consulting tablets. Why all this? Maggie gestured toward the window. Why 4 vehicles and a dozen people just to find one little boy? Dr. Chen's expression softened. Because Thomas Roberts isn't just the son of famous scientists. He's the sole heir to their patents and research foundation. His inheritance includes a trust worth over $40 million and control of the Roberts Institute, which is developing treatments that could save thousands of children's lives. Maggie felt dizzy. All those months, the quiet boy eating pancakes in her diner had been carrying such a weight on his small shoulders without even knowing it. Does Thomas, know any of this? No, Dr. Chen replied. And that's part of why we're here. His uncle was attempting to gain control of the trust through forged paperwork. We believe he took Thomas specifically to access the fortune. Liu, abandoning all pretense of not listening, leaned across the counter. So what happens to the kid now? That's where things get interesting, Dr. Chen smiled slightly. The Roberts had close friends and colleagues, the Hendersons, named as Thomas's guardians in their will. They've been desperate to find him. They're flying in tonight. 6 months passed. The diner had seen some changes, new paint, fixed window frames, an updated menu featuring healthier options alongside the classics. But the biggest change was the Kids Eat Free program, funded anonymously but clearly connected to the regular presence of the black SUV that sometimes appeared in the parking lot. Maggie was refilling coffee cups one sunny morning when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Tommy, dressed in properly fitted clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his face fuller and healthier than she ever seen it. Behind him stood a kind-looking couple, the Hendersons, who had become his legal guardians. Dr. Chen accompanied them, smiling warmly at Maggie. Tommy ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist in a hug that nearly knocked her off balance. You came back, she whispered, blinking back tears. We all did, he said, and the sound of his voice, clear and confident, made her realize how rarely she'd heard him speak before. Dr. Chen told me everything. About my parents, about what they did, about the foundation. The Hendersons approached, extending their hands. We can never thank you enough, the woman said. What you did for him. Anyone would have done the same, Maggie insisted. But they didn't, Tommy said firmly. You did. Later, as they all sat in a booth sharing pancakes, the Hendersons explained their plans. They had purchased the building that housed the diner, ensuring it would remain open. The renovation work was just the beginning. We want to turn the vacant space next door into a center for kids who need help, Tommy explained excitedly. With free meals and a place to do homework and people to talk to if they need it. Tommy's idea, his new guardian added proudly. He's quite insistent about it. As they discussed the details, Maggie watched Tommy, this boy who had endured so much, who had once been too afraid to look her in the eye, now confidently sharing his vision for helping others. When it was time for them to leave, Tommy lingered behind for a moment. He pressed something into Maggie's hand. A small, carefully folded paper. She opened it to find a child's drawing of the diner, but more detailed than before. In it, a stick figure with a big smile stood behind the counter, and a small note was written at the bottom. Some people save lives with medicine. Some people save lives with pancakes. 1 year had passed since the day Tommy walked back into the Sunrise Diner with his new guardians. The changes they'd promised had come to life in ways that transformed not just the building, but the entire neighborhood. The kids' first center, next door to the diner, buzzed with activity most afternoons. What had once been an abandoned storefront was now filled with comfortable furniture, books, computers, and most importantly, children who needed a safe place. Some came for homework help, others for the free meals, and many simply because it was warmer and kinder than where they would otherwise go after school. Maggie split her time between managing the diner and helping at the center. She'd never imagined herself doing anything but waiting tables, but life had taken an unexpected turn. Now she had an office with her name on the door, though she rarely used it, preferring to be out front where she could greet the regulars. Lou still worked the grill most mornings, refusing to fully retire despite the Hendersons' generous offer. "These hands still know how to flip pancakes better than any youngster you could hire," he'd grumbled when they suggested he might want to take it easy. But everyone noticed how his perpetual frown had softened, especially when the children from the center peeked into the kitchen to say hello. On a bright spring morning, Maggie was arranging fresh flowers on the counter when she noticed a small girl lingering outside the diner window. The child couldn't have been more than 8, with tangled hair and clothes that had clearly been handed down several times. She was watching the people inside eat with the unmistakable look of hunger that Maggie had come to recognize all too well. For a moment, Maggie was transported back to that rainy day when she'd first rushed out with food for Tommy. Without hesitation, she grabbed a blueberry muffin and headed for the door. The little girl startled when Maggie approached, taking a step backward. "It's okay," Maggie said gently, holding out the muffin. "We made too many this morning. Would you like this one?" After a moment's hesitation, the girl took the muffin with a whispered thank you so quiet Maggie almost missed it. "I'm Maggie," she said, crouching down to eye level. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied, already nibbling at the edge of the muffin. "Well, Lily, we're about to serve lunch at the center next door. Real food, not just muffins. Would you like to join us?" The girl looked uncertain, but the promise of more food was clearly tempting. She nodded slowly. As they walked toward the center's entrance, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Tommy hopped out, followed by Dr. Chen. At 12 years old now, Tommy had shot up several inches, but his smile was the same one that had gradually emerged during those months at the diner, bright and genuine. "Maggie," he called, jogging over. Then he noticed the small girl half hiding behind her. His expression changed, understanding immediately. "Hi there," he said, his voice gentler. "Are you coming for lunch? They're making spaghetti today. It's the best." Lily peeked around Maggie's legs, studying Tommy with cautious interest. Inside the center, volunteers were setting up tables for the daily lunch program. Photos lined one wall, showing the building's transformation from empty shell to vibrant community space. In the center was a framed newspaper article with the headline, "Local Diner Inspires Nationwide Meals First Program." The Childwell Foundation, guided by Tommy's experiences and ideas, had launched similar centers in 12 cities across the country. Each one partnered with a local restaurant to provide meals, creating safe spaces centered around the simple but powerful act of feeding a child who needed it. Dr. Chen watched as Tommy showed Lily around, pointing out the books and computers she could use. "It's remarkable," she said to Maggie. "When we found him, he barely spoke. Now look at him." "Children are resilient," Maggie replied, "when they have something to believe in." Later that afternoon, Maggie found Tommy sitting alone, looking thoughtfully at his parents' photo on his phone. The Hendersons had made sure he knew everything about them, their work, their dreams, the lives they'd saved with their research. "Do you think they'd be proud?" he asked quietly when he noticed her. "Of what we're doing with their money?" Maggie sat beside him. "I never met your parents, but I know they must have been extraordinary people to have raised such an extraordinary son. And yes, I think they'd be very proud." Tommy nodded, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "You know what's weird? If my uncle hadn't been so terrible, if I hadn't been so hungry that I actually took food from a stranger, none of this would have happened." "Life's funny that way," Maggie agreed. "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." They watched as Lily, already looking more comfortable, helped a volunteer set out cookies for the afternoon snack. Another child saved, another story beginning. "You know," Tommy said, "the foundation board wants to open 10 more centers next year." They're asking me to help choose the locations. Got any ideas? Maddie asked. Tommy smiled, the quiet confidence in his eyes still sometimes surprising her. I was thinking we should look for places with diners and waitresses who notice things. Hashtag a waitress secretly fed a quiet boy every day. One morning, Ford SUVs pulled up to her diner. 5 years passed like pages turning in a book. Tommy was 17 now, tall and confident, nothing like the scared, hungry boy who once crept into the diner. He visited the Sunrise at least once a month, always sitting at his old corner table, always ordering the same pancakes with extra syrup. Today was special though. The Sunrise Diner was celebrating its grand reopening after extensive renovations. The old place had needed more than just a fresh coat of paint. The plumbing was ancient, the wiring dangerous, the kitchen equipment from another era. For 3 months, the building had been closed while crews worked to bring it up to date without losing the character that made it special. Maddie stood behind the brand new counter, surveying the gleaming space with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. The cracked vinyl booths had been replaced with comfortable new ones in the same shade of red. The wobbly tables were gone, but the new ones looked nearly identical. Most importantly, the feeling remained, that sense of warmth and welcome that had always defined the place. Nervous? Lou asked, appearing beside her. He'd officially retired 2 years ago, but still showed up most mornings to make sure these new cooks don't mess up the hash browns. His hair was completely white now, his movements a bit slower, but his eyes were brighter than they'd been when Maggie first started working for him all those years ago. A little, she admitted. What if it's too different? What if the regulars don't like it? They'll like it fine, Lou said firmly. Good food and good people, that's what makes a diner, not the furniture. The bell above the door jingled, the same bell, carefully preserved during construction, and Tommy walked in, followed by the Hendersons and Dr. Chen. Behind them came a stream of people, the mayor, local business owners, reporters from the town newspaper, and dozens of children and families who had been helped by the Kids First Center over the years. Surprise! They called out together, and Maggie felt tears spring to her eyes. The Hendersons had planned this without telling her, a proper celebration not just of the diner's reopening, but of the 5-year anniversary of the Kids First initiative. What had started in their small town had grown into a national program with 47 centers across the country, each one partnered with a local restaurant. Tommy made his way to Maggie and handed her a small wrapped package. Open it, he urged. Inside was a simple silver pin shaped like a coffee cup. Turn it over, Tommy said. Engraved on the back were the words, "Some people save lives with medicine. Some people save lives with pancakes." We've made them for everyone who works at a partner restaurant, he explained. There are over 300 people wearing them now, from Maine to California. Before Maddie could respond, a small commotion at the door caught everyone's attention. Lily, no longer the tiny, frightened girl from 4 years ago, but a confident 12-year-old, was leading someone inside. It was a woman in her 30s, thin and tired-looking, with nervous eyes that darted around the crowded room. "This is my mom," Lily announced proudly. She got the job at the center. She's going to be managing the new computer lab. Maggie remembered the day, almost 2 years ago, when Lily's mother had finally appeared, newly sober and desperate to reconnect with her daughter. Unlike Tommy's story, this one had taken a different turn. With support from the center's resources, counseling, and a lot of hard work, the family had slowly begun to heal together. Later, after speeches and cake and endless photographs, Maggie found a quiet moment to slip away to the kitchen. She needed a breather from all the attention. To her surprise, she found Tommy already there, sitting on a stool by the prep table, looking at his phone. "Too much?" she asked with a knowing smile. He nodded. "Sometimes I still need a minute to myself." Maggie leaned against the counter. "I was thinking about that first day, when I ran out in the rain with that sandwich." "I was so scared of you," Tommy admitted with a small laugh. "I thought maybe you were trying to poison me or something." "Why did you take it then?"